Hello, and welcome to Keep the Channel Open, a podcast featuring conversations with artists, writers, and curators. My name is Mike Sakasagawa, and this is episode 70. Today's guest is Blue Mitchell. Hey there, folks. So this has been a pretty intense week for me for a lot of reasons. And instead of having a monologue like I'd usually do, what I wanted to do was just ask some questions. These are some things I've been thinking about recently, and it's been illuminating to think about these things. So I just thought maybe you'd find it useful as well. First question is this. What's scarier to you? The idea of failure or the idea of success? And the follow-up is, what's underneath that? Like, what's driving that fear? And finally, what do you think would happen if you let go of that fear? I'd like to know your answers, so if you feel comfortable, hit me up. You can email me at podcast@keepthechanneleopen.com, or you can reach me on Twitter at channeleopenpod. All right, so on to today's show. Blue Mitchell is an independent publisher, curator, educator, and photographer based in Portland, Oregon. His photography has been exhibited in solo and group exhibitions nationally and is in the permanent collections of the Center for Fine Art Photography in Fort Collins, Colorado, and the Hoffman Gallery at the Oregon College of Art and Craft in Portland, Oregon. In his personal work, he implements many photographic techniques, including toy cameras, pinhole, alternative processes, mixed media, and burnt transparencies. And on top of his work as a photographer, Blue also runs a publishing company named 112, which focuses on artfully crafted photo practices. Now, I first became aware of Blue Mitchell through his annual photography magazine, Diffusion, which is, as he puts it, an independent, reader-supported annual that highlights and celebrates artfully crafted photographic artwork, including but not limited to handcrafted, alternative process, mixed media installation, photo as object, avant-garde, experimental, etc. I've appreciated Diffusion for a long time for its focus on highlighting work that really pushes the boundaries of photography as an art form, making room for all different kinds of art. And Blue's own artwork is doing the same thing. When you first see it, it's obviously visually striking, but it's more than that too. He uses his work to express themes of nostalgia and memory and the experience of nature. All that is just right up my alley. So I was pleased to get the chance to talk with him. Now, I put links in the show notes to several of the bodies of work that we discussed in our conversation, Evanescent Energy, Mythos, Chasing the Afterglow, Luminous Flux, and Of Salt and Earth, and I highly recommend that you check those out. I also put in a link to the 112 website where, if you like, you can buy copies of Diffusion and a whole lot more. If you'd like to see some of Blue's work in person, he has work included in the Pacific Northwest photography drawers at the Blue Sky Gallery in Portland, Oregon through March 2019. And one of the things that we talked about in our conversation is portfolio views. Well, Blue will be one of the reviewers at this year's Click Photography Festival in Raleigh, North Carolina. That's in October of this year. The application deadline for the Click reviews is July 30th, so if you're interested, there's still time, and I've put a link to the festival website in the show notes. Okay, if you'd like to join in the conversation, you can use the hashtag #ChannelOpenPhoto to live tweet the episode. And now here's my conversation with Blue Mitchell. So I took the opportunity to sort of reacquaint myself with your work. I'd seen it before a number of times because, you've had some features on Lens Scratch, and obviously I had been aware of Diffusion for a while, but I always like to take the opportunity. It's always fun when I get to talk to somebody to take the chance to sort of look through people's portfolios again and reacquaint myself with the work.
Sure.
And I gotta say, your work is just exceptionally visually striking. And I really feel like that is something that, how to put this? There's something about work that sort of grabs you immediately that it's very different from what I do, I feel like, but if you can have work that grabs you immediately, but still allows you sort of a way into something more than just the initial impression, That's an impressive thing. So, yeah, I just
Well, I
wanted to.
appreciate that. Always been sort of my goal. And I think that's because I like photography like that myself,
Mm-hmm.
or art in general, I should say,
Mm-hmm.
and including, film and stuff like that.
Yeah. So obviously, the first thing that sort of jumps out about your work is that you seem to be very, both as a publisher and as an artist yourself, very sort of interested in work that isn't straight ahead, either film or digital photography. That you're really interested in alternative process stuff. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, I like to call it like artfully crafted
Mm-hmm.
photography, and mostly it's just because I don't like I don't like the pigeonholed idea, and also like when I first started publishing Diffusion, people thought we were all alternative analog, and that wasn't the case. So now I'm more about just craft, handcrafted photography.
Mm-hmm. Well, so like, what does that mean to you? Handcrafted photography.
I think it's mostly for me. It's just being able to see the artist hand in the work,
Mm.
in whatever way that is, either in the process or in the shooting itself.
So, seeing the artist's hand in the work is something that I find really interesting when it comes to photography. And I feel like photography as a whole, I mean, for one thing, there's always that sort of perennial debate that I find kind of boring about what is photography and what isn't photography. But
Right.
sort of leaving that aside, I feel like photography does a really interesting thing that other visual media don't really do, which is that for a lot of different types of photography, it's real easy, at least on a surface level, to feel like the photographer almost disappears, like you don't see the hand of the artist.
Right. Yeah.
So, and I think that's one of the things that makes work like yours interesting, like that it's, especially when you put it in conversation with work that might be, I mean, there's all kinds of work out there, you know what I mean?
Right. Right. There's a large gamut of photography.
Yeah. So one of the things that really that I thought was interesting that I wanted to talk a little bit about. So your series Evanescent Energy. So that was featured on Lens Scratch a few years ago, and
Yeah.
then that's one that's also near the top of your portfolio list on your website. But so this is a series where you're taking transparency film, slide film, and shooting it and then burning it, right?
Yeah, that's basically what it is. It kind of accidentally ran into the idea with just messing around with some old slides. And I didn't expect it to be like this. In the color slides, I didn't expect the discoloration that happened, let alone the bubbling and there's I like to call it a reticulation, but there's, this pattern that comes from the crystallization of the film itself, which coincidentally over time disappears and smooths out, which I didn't know when I was first shooting that. The idea was just me messing around in the studio. Of course, that's pretty much how all this work happens, is me messing with stuff, right?
Yeah, I was going to ask because, I mean, it seems like that work in particular, really all the work, but it sort of jumped out sort of maybe most obviously in that particular series about how much sort of trial and error and accident must creep into the process.
Yeah, it's not very forgiving, really. You burn a slide and it's done, right? It's over.
Yeah.
So once I started realizing that I could do that process and I was focusing on landscapes just because at the time I was really frustrated with my landscape photography and how benign it felt and how it didn't really feel like the environment I was in when I was shooting. I didn't have the same senses in the image when it was all said and done. And photography seemed to fail me in that way for a long time, where I just didn't have the feeling that I wanted. I'm out there shooting and I hear the birds and I feel this sense of energy in the air, which is, where the title of the series came from. It was like, I wanted to capture that. And I just figured it out through burning that I could kind of, it's not the same, obviously. I'm changing the image, but I'm giving it that emotional impact that I was kind of feeling, when you're out shooting nature and stuff like that, landscapes. And I felt like Go for it.
No, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
That's right.
No, I think it's interesting to hear you talk about how you were frustrated with your own landscape photography at first. Landscape is obviously one of the major genres of photography, and it has a long history. Everybody else obviously knows, Ansel Adams or Weston or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what I think is interesting about that work is how, and in your artist statement, you really specifically, sort of explicitly talk about how that feeling is something you're trying to capture. What I think is that's sort of alluding to is how landscape photography doesn't have to impart just one kind of emotion. You know what I mean? Like when you look at a traditional landscape photograph, they're usually so much about, serenity or about maybe some kind of grandiosity of the natural tableau, where the natural experience of being out in the world can encompass so much more than just that. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, I feel like often in photography with the landscape, it's it's about the sense of place, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's like you said earlier, it removes the photographer from that experience, and really it's kind of this universal experience of landscape.
Mm-hmm.
or seeing it, in black and white. Obviously, we're looking at a different version of what we see, and you actually, with the black and white stuff, which is great, you see things you wouldn't see normally, right?
Mm-hmm.
With tones and shadows and stuff like that. So that's what's been amazing to me about being a photographer is like people used to say before the digital manipulation started happening that all this stuff this is the real world, and as you know, it's just a small frame of somebody's interpretation of the real world.
Yeah.
And then here I go and just mess it up even more.
Yeah. I mean, it's sort of interesting. I mean, I still feel like a lot of audience members have this tendency to see a photograph, especially a straight photograph, as not being a photograph, but being the thing in the photograph. Even in 2018, it's something that I find really interesting, that reaction. But I feel like photographs like yours, that you can't just take it as, it's not even exactly a representation of a subject necessarily, but rather it's very explicitly an interpretation, which I find that really fascinating,
Yeah, I like that idea of the interpretation. Part of the thing that I've always liked about photography and the stuff I publish in Diffusion and stuff like that is that, I said the artist hand being involved, but also there's like this nod to the medium that I'm really interested in my work. It's like when you're watching a film and somebody actually, when they break the fourth wall kind of thing, where you're like, oh, I'm watching a film right now,
Mm-hmm. So
to me, the object of the photograph is probably more important to me than the actual subject matter itself. Mm. It's just this, whatever it is, it's, I do a lot of different presentation styles. So whatever that is the object that's there is more important to me than anything else. But I like the nod, like I said, to the process of photography.
Mm-hmm.
I like seeing that, there's a little bit of history in there. If you look at the series we're talking about right now, the color stuff, when I first started doing that, everybody thought it was digitally manipulated. And, to me, it was like, oh, this is like, those are film bubbles. Those are melted bubbles, Mm-hmm. It's in the actual object. And, so I actually like to show people like the slides, what they actually look like in real life.
So one of the things that I did notice about a lot of the work that you do, that it is very interested in the image as object. And in particular, so you've got a couple of series where you're doing acrylic lift. So the Mythos project and the Chasing the Afterglow project that you did. Mm-hmm. And I guess that does sort of bring it back to the whole hand of the artist thing. But it does, like, it really changes the experience for the audience, right? When you approach something like a birch panel that has a image transfer on it, that is a really different experience from seeing the image on a screen, which is sort of unfortunately the only way that I've personally been able to see your work.
Right.
But I do sort of, I always find that interesting to talk about, like what's added and what's sort of different about, work that really requires you to see it in person. You know what I mean?
Right, right. Yeah, that's a kind of a frustration I've had in my own work, and, and in the stuff that we've published, is that there's this disconnect, between the object and how people can access your images. Like actually when I was photographing Chasing the Afterglow to put on my website, I was very frustrated with the whole process of trying to make the image look, be represented in this like digital format as well as it looks in person. And there's just no way to do it. I just couldn't quite do it. Like none of the work really resonates until you see it in real life, which is why like if I give an artist talk, I'll bring the work and show it, so people can actually feel it in their hands. And I think that's the case with a lot of alternative process work. It's so much more beautiful when you're looking at it in person. Because you see the nuances, like in a collodion photo, you look at it in different light. You see the nuances of the actual object and how it translates. And I like that in the real world, but, digitally, obviously, it's it's a problem. But I still try to represent it. And so you understand that at least that they're tactile, that there's like some texture there and that light is important, how you view the stuff.
Yeah. It's also just something, even sort of apart from, the difference in the appearance of it, is just how, philosophically, I guess, that the thing is a different thing, that the image isn't the totality of it. And so when you are in the same room with the thing, that has a different impact than seeing it remotely,
Right, right. Yeah, I've always felt like I've always treated photography, the image itself, whatever the subject is, and the equipment, I've always thought of them as just as tools to kind of get to this final conceived, image or whatever it is, this idea. I'm not a purist in that, once you take the photo and you print it, then that's it. I'm more interested in this emotional impact that the object has, which is also why I remove a lot of information in a lot of my work, so it's a little more accessible. It's not so specific, not specific environments, not specific places, not specific people. I want them to be more universal when people view them, and make them a little more accessible, but also so I can tug at those emotional strings that's important to me, right, when I'm viewing work.
Mm-hmm. Do you find that that audiences pick up on that? Like, there's a certain amount of sort of abstractness to a lot of your work, and sometimes that can be the kind of thing that, at least with a sort of lay audience, can be sort of challenging for them. But I think for an educated audience member, that stuff is right there. It's not necessarily difficult to access. I just wonder, when if you have an exhibition, and you're talking to the people that show up, what is that? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I find it difficult actually, because the people that have the most problems with my work are usually people that are trained in photography. Yeah. Right? People that understand the principles of photography and what they're supposed to look like. And when I kind of throw all that out and turn them into something that's not really photography anymore, it's more like, looks more like a painting or whatever, however you want to interpret it. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I find my most difficult audience is your purist of photography. They're like, well, that's not really a photograph, It's something. It's been manipulated, and however I've manipulated it. So I've noticed that it goes two ways. Like I have artists that are just appreciating it as a piece of art and not as a photograph, and those people seem to like it the most. That they're not hung up on what a photograph is or how I've used, or degraded photography.
It's such a weird idea that you can degrade an art form by participating in it. I don't know. It's just so weird. But you're right. I do hear that kind of thing all the time, particularly in online forums where people want to talk about definitions a lot, Right. It kind of makes me nuts sometimes. So another one of your series that I wanted to talk about was Luminous Flux.
Oh yeah.
And in particular, so there's not a lot of information about that on your website, but you do note that it's an ongoing collaboration with your daughter.
Yeah, that's actually it's now daughters
Ah,
because I just started making more of these lumen prints with my youngest daughter this summer. So they're both participating now, and
so
there's actually a bunch more that aren't on the website at this point.
so how old are your kids?
3 and 7.
3 and 7. All right, yeah, that's right around this. I've got a 3-year-old also, and then I have a 6 and a 9.
Oh wow! Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it's an interesting thing. Like, first of all, just the idea of collaboration at all is always interesting to me as an artist.
Mm.
But the idea of collaborating with children or collaborating with family, there's something about that I find really, I mean, it's sweet to start with, but I feel like there's something more to it than that. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah, what you said was great. It's sweet to start because that's really how it started. I was out there. I ran out of cyanotype paper for my daughter. I'm like, oh, let's just do some lumen prints, and because I'd already been kind of playing around with them on my own. And my oldest daughter, she's quite artistic, as they are at that age. Who knows where that'll go. But what I found so interesting is her compositions were so different from what I would do. And so I felt like I was just sort of coaching her, like, hey, what if we tried adding some water, which you'll see in that series. There's a lot of water droplets and to add more texture than, just a straight botanical lumen print, which you see a lot of. I thought we need to add a little more texture to it and stuff like that. But yeah, I love this, you can make hundreds and hundreds of these things with the kids, and, you might have just a few that really look, really great. But it's the process of working, it's different than like drawing with my kids. Like, because this is a medium that I'm so immersed in, it's more exciting for me, number one. But number two, it's like, it's so easy for the kids to just make this work and have an immediate gratification of seeing the image, right? They don't have to wait for the film to develop or, you know what I mean? It's like just immediately, here it is. That's what it looks like. It's super simple, but I love the sensibilities that the kids put into there's laying stuff on a piece of paper and how that wondrous of like the experimentation of it for them is, what if I try this? What if I try that? And it's just like seeing that. It's really exciting to watch.
There is something about, and it's something that I haven't personally experienced in quite a long time. But, that first time when you see a print in the developer, the sort of magic of it and getting to do that with your kids seems pretty cool. What's sort of surprising, I think, about this work is that, I'm sure, like, as you said, there are, a lot of them that you don't necessarily put into the portfolio, but the ones that are in the portfolio, they don't look like work by young children. Like the compositions are sort of surprising in a lot of cases, and they're visually interesting. I mean, I like my kids, for example, I love them to pieces, and I love seeing what they want to draw and things like that. And sometimes it is kind of surprising, but I think, for example, when it comes to composing, there's often, especially with my middle kid, she has a real tendency towards symmetry, for example.
Oh, right.
And sort of, centering things. And whereas, in a lot of these images, the compositions are a lot more complex than that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, oh yeah, for sure. I think that part of the lumen print process helps with that because it's such an organic process and you really can't control it very well. I mean, you can control the objects on the paper, right? But I tell them, just add more, just add more and see what happens and move stuff around. And yeah, my favorite ones are the ones that have that surprising composition where it's like, I would have never even thought of doing that,
Yeah.
I'm actually more, when I'm trying to do a lumen print, I'm more symmetrical. I just have a tendency to put stuff in there and try to organize it. And that's what's great about the kids. They don't seem to care about that as much. Especially with this process. I do understand what you're saying about the drawing part, because I feel like my 6-year-old, she does kind of like to kind of be organized in that way. But it just depends on what it is. It seems like the medium's different for her. Whatever medium she, painting, she's way more fluid, It just depends, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. I do. I mean, it does come back to sort of the whole idea that we were talking about before about sort of discovery and that kind of thing. I dig it. So, and then your most recent body of work, I think, is Of Salt and Earth. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly.
So can you tell me a little bit about this series and like how it works?
Yeah, this is actually one of my more straightforward. I'm actually shooting digitally, but the images, so my base images are a lot of the work I was doing for the Chasing the Afterglow series. And these are just sort of outtakes. So I had a lot of prints printed out, and this actually started because of my kids as well. I had prints sitting out on the table outside, and they had somehow dumped a bunch of dirt on one of them, one of the ones with the moon on it. And I was like, oh, that looks cool. So I just took a quick shot of it with my iPhone, and this dirt added this texture on top of my print that I really enjoyed, how it just randomly made this kind of textural composition. It made it look a little bit more like some cosmos stars or something going on. It activated my print way more than it was. So I thought, oh, wow, that's great. Maybe I'll do this in the studio and do it on purpose. So, and I had a lot of dark images with moons and stars, and, and so I was using salt as this white, atmosphere, and then they kind of look like stars or clouds, and then, and I started adding charcoal to the top. So really, I'm just putting stuff on top of my print and then re-photographing the print. And then I'll even crop in certain areas, and it creates this whole new image from the original. And I really like this painterly style that, that I can throw some baking soda on my paper and shake the paper around, and it makes a Milky Way, and I'll shoot a variety of the same kind of image over and over and over. I'll just change it slightly or add something to it. And it's like a super organic way of working. It's totally up to chance. And, I've shot so much of it that looks horrible. Just like anything else, doesn't always look great, but sometimes I get lucky and there's some really interesting images. And it really is it's more of a meditative process for me. I don't have to have any control really. I mean, some of the images I do, I'll put in a circle form or something, and that's about as much control as I give it. And the rest of it is, I'm just pretty much just splashing charcoal or salt or whatever on the print and shaking it and moving it around. And it's one of those things where I was just having fun in the studio with something, and it actually turned into something that I really enjoyed and actually loved the results. And then, let's make some prints out of this. So it's been a fun series. Yeah.
It's sort of interesting, and I'm thinking about my own work, that I always say I have the hardest time when it comes to constructing an image. That I'm pretty good at observing things, that I'm pretty good at noticing things, and maybe I might notice things that other people don't notice. So it's something that I can then sort of catch and then show it to you. But right. I have a difficulty with doing things on purpose. One of the things that I have found is that when I try to control things, that's when the images end up feeling really sort of stiff or boring or overly didactic. And it's when I sort of give up on, it's either the things that I notice by chance or the things that I am building, but doing it in a way where I don't actually physically contain or control the parameters. That wind up with images that I end up liking. And it seems like what you're talking about here is having sort of stumbled onto a way of doing both of those things, right? Where you aren't controlling the variables of the image exactly, but you are sort of putting yourself in a situation where these sort of emergent properties can come about. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I feel like I like working in that way because I don't feel as much pressure. I'm not as stressed out about it. And I think because I've learned over the years that when I'm out photographing, I'm not really that good of a photographer in general. It's because I'm not real technical, so I don't care so much about exposures and apertures and
that must make some of those purists really irritated.
Oh, of course, yeah. Well, I remember I always go back to. I always remind myself, like when I was in college, learning the zone system and how aggravating that was for me. You know, and I understood the principles of it, but I just didn't want to do that for my work. You know, I wasn't interested in that for my work. I was like, oh, let's make it grainy and super contrasty. Like, you know, like that wasn't why I was in photography. I wasn't in for that perfect, you know, tonal range and stuff like that. But I did have this conversation over and over the years, though, like, oh, what am I doing? Like, am I even a photographer? Like, I'm not very good. You know? And really I realized it's not, you know, I use photo as a basis for what I like to do. And as soon as I like let go of oftentimes if I let go of the purpose, or if I let go of trying to make a certain kind of image, then it seems like things just happen.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like you're saying about, you know, trying to control things when you're out shooting, and more just going out and just noticing things and shooting it, you know. And then sometimes things relate to things you're already shooting because you're kind of in that mindset, right? Mm-hmm. I'm working on a series. Maybe it's about color, or it's about, you know, a place, or it's about whatever the case may be. But if you go out saying, I'm going to go get this one image, it doesn't always, in fact, it hardly ever works out that way. You're just going out and you're shooting.
Yeah.
And if you just go out and like let go of trying to get a certain thing, sometimes you come up with something really amazing.
Yeah.
Because you're just out looking and you're being more in tune with just what's around you, or how you feel in that moment. You know, what's interesting to you.
Yeah, I like the thing that you said a minute ago, where you said that it takes the pressure off. One of the things that I have nothing but respect for photographers who can work in studio. That's just not in my range. I can't do that. I've just sort of made my peace with that. I have plenty of respect for people who can work that way. For me, one of the things is that, like, if I ever try and set something up in a studio, I always just feel like I'm not smart enough to do this. You know, like I'm not like if I have to make something profound on purpose, then like I'm not wise enough to be able to be profound on purpose. But if it's just like I can happen to notice something that the world is showing me, well, then that's not really me doing it. Then I just happen to be in the right place at the right time.
Right. That's an interesting comment. I hadn't really ever thought of it that way.
Yeah. So I definitely don't want to end the segment before we talk about 112. Obviously, that's a big part of your work as well. So 112 Publishing is your publishing company. You publish an annual photography magazine called Diffusion. You formerly had the Plates to Pixels online gallery. You do a number of things with your blog featuring different photographers' work. And also occasionally you do the occasional photo book publishing. Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about first is like sort of where all of that came from. You know, it's like you see a lot of people talk about, you know, being a good artistic citizen, but there's not that many people actually go out and build a whole thing around that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You know, it really started out just like any of my other work. I had this idea, like, you know, I've always thought it'd be cool to run a magazine since I was like in high school. You know, I was really into graphic design and advertising arts my whole life. So I've always been doing graphic design. And, you know, once I was out of college and I started doing the Plates to Pixels website, I was really enjoying that interaction I was having with the artists. In fact, I wasn't even caring about who was actually viewing the website, because I was mostly just interested in working with the artist and interviewing them and promoting their work in this very small venue.
I can relate to that.
I'm sure you can. So I think that's, again, there was no pressure with what I was doing. When I decided to do this first issue, I didn't really expect it to even take off. I just wanted to do it for me. You know, I wanted to do this project that had nothing to do with my photography or my art, but it was more about people I knew and work that I was really interested in. and we had articles that I thought were engaging, and really I thought it was a moment in time. I started, well, the first issue of Diffusion came out in 2009, so it's been almost 10 years. And at that time, all these magazines were folding, and newspapers were folding. So people were like, "What are you doing trying to start a magazine? If you're a nobody and you have no funding, right?" I'm like, "I don't care. It's not really about that. I just wanted to do it for me, just for something fun." And we printed 500 of them, and I really used a lot of the relationships I had started with the Place to Pixels website to kind of make this thing happen, and also friends that I knew and that could write, and people that could help me edit, and I had a designer help me design. And so I had a lot of help. It was definitely a collaboration. And then the thing just flew out. We sold the 500 within 3 months that I printed, and I was just shocked. Oh my gosh, this is a thing. And a lot of that was online sales through the alternativephotography.com website. They listed on their site. So we got all these international sales because of them, and they already had a large following, and we were featuring a lot of alternative process photography. So it kind of got out there, surprisingly to me. I didn't even know how I was going to sell it. We didn't have that many, so I didn't have a big distributor or anything like that. So I was basically just going off of word of mouth. And anyways, it was a very organic process. So I thought, okay, we could do another one, but I didn't have any goals on making this a bi-yearly. I didn't want to do 4 issues a year. I just, I have a full-time job and trying to do my own work and trying to run this other website. So I just thought I'll just turn it into an annual. I'll just do one a year because that's really all I had time for. And I'm really glad I did, because I'm able to focus so much on the content and design and all. I can spend way more time finessing it every year because I have quite a bit of time to do that. So anyways, that's basically how it started. And then I took that first issue and sent it out to a bunch of my favorite artists and asked them if they wanted to participate. A couple of them said yes. So I thought, all right, this is a thing. So we did volume 2, and I ended up printing 2,000 of them instead of 500, which in hindsight was too many. Because I still have 300 of those volume 2s. So it was a learning process. I knew nothing about publishing or how to get it out in the world. I didn't really know. Even printing, we were printing our first 5 issues. We printed offset press, and so I had to learn a lot. There's a major learning curve involved with the production itself. Even just setting files up for the printer and getting everything color corrected. And it was a bit of a nightmare for me going to press checks and seeing the collodion plates are looking super yellow or super green, and you have all these different processes within one spread, and trying to make, split the difference, try to make the collodion piece look good next to the platinum prints, next to this, digital abstract montage piece. Oh my gosh, this is sort of a nightmare, but what have I done? Because I was really I want the quality of the reproductions to be as good as possible. And that's important to me, to have these things not look shoddy, right?
Yeah.
Here I'm going to print your work, but it's going to come back to you and look really weird,
Well, I think everybody, Diffusion has a really good reputation for being a really well-produced magazine. It's pretty well known at this point. I feel like everybody that I've ever heard talk about Diffusion always, it's, I think part of, like you say, part of it, because it only comes out once a year, it really feels like kind of a special thing,
Yeah, I'm glad that it worked out like that, because it was kind of an accident, Yeah. But I think it's just like anything else. I just want to put out the best, that I can in the moment. And I need to be able to change. I've changed Diffusion as much as I changed myself and changed my own work. I've changed what the focus is and the content and how it all looks and the design. I'm changing it because it's influenced by the participants, the people that we publish, and the people, I've had some great interns that have helped me. And it's really not me saying, this is what I want. It's me saying, this is what they want. Let's do it together. I've done this smart thing where I send out surveys every year after each issue goes out, and like, what do you like about it? What do you not like about it? What should we do more of? What should we do less of? That kind of thing. So it's grown because of our viewership and what they're interested in. And also it's grown with technology, like the fact that a lot of the articles I pulled from the magazine in these recent issues, and I can do that stuff on my blog now, and it saves me space so I can print larger images and more of them now. So we used to collage, I could try to get as many images on a spread as possible, and now it's like I only put one or two on a spread. It's like I want to make the images bigger and let's engage with the articles and interviews and all that kind of stuff on our blog, because we can, and we have unlimited space there, right? So let's just focus on the work itself. And so it's been like this great change with technology, but I've had to adapt. I've had to like change our website several times, and diffusionmag.com had its own website, and it's just I've had to like, okay, we're doing so many things now, it all needs to be in one place. So I've spent the last year like, okay, let's put everything in one place, put our store in one place, and really focus in on who we are and what our brand is. And I feel like it's really come to a nice crescendo now that we've put out quite a few issues, and we have good following, and and there's always great collateral things, right? Or I get invited to do stuff that there's no way I would have been invited to normally, which is great too. I enjoy that.
Yeah. Well, why don't we take a little break, and then we'll come back and do the second segment.
Sounds good.
So for the second segment, I always invite the guest to bring a topic of their own, which could be whatever you'd like to talk about, whatever's on your mind. So what would you like to talk about today?
Well, being a listener of your program, I know that you're involved with Medium.
Yes.
And I thought I would talk about your experience with the portfolio reviews and the festival itself, like the photography festivals, because that's one of the things that I've really enjoyed about being a part of this photo community is being able to attend festivals and do portfolio reviews. And part of that is my interest that we talked about earlier is this handcrafted photography. I get to see the work in person. When I do these, either go to a portfolio walk and I see stuff out on the tables, or actually sit down and talk to photographers about their work, and I get to see it and feel it. And that's pretty exciting for me, as a publisher and just as a lover of photography. It's twofold. I get to offer opportunities to people, but more selfishly, I just get to see really good work and meet really cool people.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I always tell everybody that Medium is my favorite thing that I do every year. And I'm not like a reviewer or anything. I just go as a participant, but I can actually pretty definitively say that pretty much every opportunity that I've had as both as an artist and as a podcaster has come about through that. This show would not exist. It came from an idea that I had because of conversations that I was having at Medium.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely been a huge boon for me. Yeah.
So you're talking about like your conversations with photographers that you were having at the festival inspired you to actually do this for your podcast, right?
Yeah. Well, it was sort of a combination because, I don't think you haven't been to Medium, have you?
I haven't been to Medium, no.
Yeah, it's great. And, I definitely recommend it. They do.
It's on my bucket list.
Yeah. They do 4 days, right? And the first 2 days are portfolio reviews, but the second 2 days are artist lectures. Okay. And I think in terms of, for me, doing both of those things really sort of increased my confidence in being able to talk, just have conversations. So like I would have conversations just sitting around the lobby in between reviews. That's one thing. But also attending these artist lectures, and then they have a Q&A at the end. I don't know. I feel a little weird about this, but the thing that really started it was a few years ago at the festival. It was in between artist lectures. We were taking a lunch break, and I had just been asking some questions in the Q&A that had come before that, and I went out into the lobby. There was a little restaurant off of the lobby right there. And I wandered in. I was going to get myself some lunch, and Claire Warden and Drew Nikonovich, both of whom have been on the show. And I know you've done an interview with Claire before.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
We're just sitting in the restaurant there. They were having lunch and talking, and they invited me to come over and talk with them. And I was like, whoa, I mean, these people want to talk to me. And, Drew said something like, you ask really good questions. You're really smart. Like you should keep doing that. And I thought, huh, okay. and it really, I mean, I don't know. It's a silly thing. Drew's, especially considering in some ways, Drew's so much younger than I am. But
right.
like, I just felt like I'd been given permission to sort of do this thing that I kind of wanted to do anyway, you know?
Right. Well, you took something you love and embraced it and went with it, which I think is great. I think it's the way to do it. And, you know, the thing about, I think the questions, having the right kind of questions too for artists, when it's like I said earlier to you, the questions are great, you know, and that's actually, you know, since I've been listening to your podcast, what I really liked is the questions, because like I said, it's you bringing out stuff that people don't necessarily ask normally. A lot of artists like to talk about their work, but they like to be challenged, you know, they like to have, you know, like they like something different, you know, or even, you know, publishers or whoever the case may be. I think it's the being challenged by the question is just as exciting as it's because it's more of a conversation rather than a Q&A, right? Mm-hmm. You're having a conversation. And I think that's the key thing for me is like part of actually when I was doing my early issues of Diffusion, they were, you know, I was sending questions to people and they were answering them. And they really fell flat for me because they weren't conversations. So I started making them conversations, you know, even though I couldn't necessarily talk to people in person, I started sending them only one question at a time, and I would do like a written conversation. At least that made me feel like it was more engaging because I was taking the things that they answered from a question and regurgitating it in my mind and saying, okay, like, how does this, you know, what does this have to do with this, you know, from things they said versus just asking generic questions, which to me is, you know, kind of boring.
I mean, I feel like the people that I talk to on the show and the people that I've talked to, just whether they're friends or whether they're lecturers or whatever at different events or openings or whatever, these are people who have just immeasurably improved my life by putting the work into my life. And so it's like the absolute least thing that I can do to actually engage with the work and think about the work, and then to make the conversation something that is, you know, something that's going to be interesting for me. Like if it's something that I'm legitimately curious about and not just in order to have an interview, you know, that I actually want to talk to somebody.
Right.
But so you were talking about the photo community and festivals. What do you find to be the thing that you enjoy most about festivals with respect to community?
I think it's similar to what you're saying. Part of it for me, and, you know, I feel like I accidentally came upon the festival scene because I was invited to Photonola pretty much right after I was producing our second issue. And, you know, it was an honor to be asked to come review work in person at this event. But I was also like, it was nerve wracking because I'd never done anything like that before. And I actually hadn't had the opportunity to sit on the other side of the table yet as a photographer. So I didn't have any idea what I was getting into as far as how the format was and all that. But what I found was what I really enjoyed was it was less about worrying about how I was presenting myself, but more as I just really enjoyed the conversations that I was having with the artists that were sitting down. And I actually, like I said, I got to look at the work and talk to them about it. And because I am trained in photography, I can talk about photography and, you know, going back to the history of photography and then contemporary issues and being able to have that knowledge base of being able to actually engage with them about photography in general, you know, but I feel like that's kind of what started me, like, being more interested in having those conversations with people. But really, what I get out of it the most is just the connections with people and all these friends I now have because of being able to travel to these festivals and stuff like that. It's amazing to me how how tight you can get with someone in a couple days and feel like you have some camaraderie. And I'm really good about like trying to keep up with people too, keeping in touch with them and, and providing as many opportunities as I can for good work too, in as many venues, I think that like I've grown so much, kind of like you were saying, I've gotten so much out of engaging with the artwork and the people over the years that it's been mind blowing to me, really, how Diffusion has developed because of it, but also just how I've kind of developed as a person and the things that I'm interested in. And honestly, like my confidence level engaging in this photo world is increased tremendously, just because it seems to me that everybody's so supportive, like in other art avenues. I've not seen this kind of support that we get in the photo community amongst, like I always tell people at those reviews, when I'm talking to photographers, said, when you are here at this portfolio review, probably your most important connections you'll ever make are your peers that are here with you, right? Not necessarily the reviewers, because you might actually get more opportunities from your friends that are there with you,
Yeah.
I always tell people, that's just as important as talking to the reviewers and the people that are there doing artist talks and all that kind of stuff is having that camaraderie amongst yourselves. Because, I think I can say that because I'm a photographer and I get it. I get that you can actually give each other opportunities.
Yeah, that is something I think a lot of people miss. It's interesting, you say you have so many friends now that you can get tight with people in just a couple days. It is an interesting thing how having the context of the art, because for most of us, the art has at least some personal dimension to it, or at least the work that tends to resonate, right? Like some people, I guess, maybe are just making stuff that's kind of impersonal, but I think the stuff that tends to, at least the stuff that I connect with, has some personal dimension to it, even if it's not necessarily about the person's life or specific emotions. Maybe they're doing documentary work. Maybe they're doing, like I saw some work that was about environmental issues that I thought was interesting. And it lead to interesting conversations because that's something that person cares deeply about. And it just gives you a way in to sort of shortcut the sort of bullshit that you might, if you were just meeting somebody at a party or something.
Right. Well, it cuts out the small talk because you already can kind of see something about somebody.
Yeah.
Right, that wouldn't come up in that small talk conversation.
Yeah, it's something where you like the thing for me. I've been thinking a lot about small talk. It was like because when I started doing this show, all the people in my family and close friends were like, "You're going to talk to people for a podcast?" Like, because I'm kind of shy and reserved in my normal life, and everybody was sort of surprised. For me, I was realizing that the thing that I dislike about small talk is the part where you're not really sure what you can talk about, like what's okay to talk about with people, because you don't have the frame of reference, you sort of talk about stuff like where I'm just always so terrified that someone is going to either think I'm an idiot or get mad at me or like think I'm being, intrusive or maybe not engaged enough. And
right. Or judgmental.
Right. But when you're at a photo event, you people have got their work out, they're showing it on purpose. That gives you an entry point, and you know that at the very least they want to talk about that, and then that will give you the impetus to talk about all the other stuff. It's one of the things I love most is that connection that you get.
Yeah, oh yeah. Well, and also following up on what you just said, when people are laying their work out there to show to people, they're essentially opening themselves up, and being vulnerable, right? I mean, who's not vulnerable when they're showing their kind of stuff they've been working on that they it's really important to them, and then they're exposing themselves and they're prepared for that, right? You have to mentally prepare yourself for being vulnerable, essentially.
Yeah. I really have appreciated, and I've heard that it isn't like, I haven't been to any other portfolio review events besides Medium, and I've heard that it isn't always like this. But one of the things I really like about what Scott does is that the lineup of reviewers that he picks are all people that, he wants to have people who can actually do something more for you than just say, this is good or bad.
Right. Yeah.
But also, like, he doesn't pick people who are assholes. like for the most part. And everybody has had a bad review experience, even at Medium. I have as well. But like, for the most part, the people that he picks are very supportive. Like, and I've had very few instances where like the person who has been reviewing my work has just been like unhelpful. Even if they don't like the work, they're willing to talk to me about, what parts are working for them or what I might consider doing differently. And that's also something that I find about the reviewees. Again, there are always a few exceptions, but mostly the photographers I've met at these places are not prima donnas,
Right.
Like, nobody likes getting a bad review, but like most of the time when people I talk to get a review that isn't stellar, they're more thoughtful about it rather than being like, well, that person, and that's such a, I don't like that energy either.
Well, it's funny you mentioned have asshole reviewers. You notice that a lot of those people won't get invited back as a reviewer.
Yeah.
I've noticed that at like Photo Lucida here in Portland. It's it's a bigger festival. So there's a lot of, it's 4 days. It's grueling for the reviewers, but, it's like they just won't invite people back if it's a problem,
Yeah.
You want that good energy. You want people to come out of there positive, even if people don't necessarily like the work or can do anything with it. Having an engaging conversation about it one way or another is better than nothing, right?
Yeah.
Better than walking away mad,
Yeah. I always think about, for myself, I've done the reviews at Medium, I think three times, and maybe four. I sort of lost track. But the first two times I went, cause like I didn't actually go to art school. I didn't have any background. I was almost completely self-taught. And the first 2 years that I went to the first and second years, or the first and third year. I skipped the second year, and my work at that point was really just not ready yet. And especially the second time I got reviewed, it was a little disheartening because I was like, yes, the first time I was really not ready. But I've spent 2 years working and the work is the best it's ever been. And then for the most part, everybody was still not that impressed. But the thing that was really great about it was that basically everybody, even that second time, they were like, or even the first time, they were like, this isn't really ready yet. You need to keep working on it, but do keep working on it, and here are some things that you might consider. And that was actually really, really helpful to me. Like, one of the people in particular who was really helpful is that Aline Smithson has reviewed my work 3 times. And being able to come back to her over and over again, she was able to sort of see the progress in my work.
She's amazing that way too, because she remembers, right? She'll remember the old work and see your growth, right? Especially for someone who sees so much work all the time.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, she's one of the best reviewers out there, I think.
Yeah. You mentioned the first time when you were at Photonola, you hadn't been on the other side of the table at that point. Have you now?
No, I still haven't. It's interesting you bring that up, because I haven't felt like my work is ready yet, and I'm still not ready. I don't think, and I think being on the other side of the table, like, has even supported that, that notion, because I in the same way have seen so many people progress, and I've reviewed some of the same people at different festivals over the years, and watching the progression's just been amazing for me, because I'm like, I'm a champion of their work, but at some point you see an artist and be like, boom, they've got it, right? They figured it out. Like they've been working diligently and didn't give up, and now look what's happening. Actually, a good friend of mine here in Portland, Heidi Kirkpatrick, had that experience similar to what you had. Is like when she went to her first Photo Lucida, her work wasn't quite ready yet, and then she took some time off, and then she came back with a whole different body of work, and then it like sang, like it was like ready. And so having that accomplishment of not giving up, I'm just gonna keep going and try something new and try it again and see how it goes. But I feel like these festivals, there's this other side where they're not cheap to go to. They're not cheap to attend. So you have you have to invest a lot of your time and money into something. And I feel like if you're not quite ready, that you might waste your time. And so that's kind of where I've been with my stuff. It's like, I just not there yet, you know? And I don't feel like the work is universal enough for a lot of the reviews that I would probably sit down to talk to people. So, but it's also like my own being so involved in the photo community and knowing what's out there and being so immersed, I'm a little timid with my own work to take that leap, you know.
I mean,
that's just the honesty of it. You know?
Yeah, but on the other hand, I mean, you exhibit your work. Yeah, I mean, your CV is pretty long. You got a pretty good exhibition history, so it's not like you're just keeping it under wraps. It's like, you know, you're not like keeping it in a drawer like Emily Dickinson. You know, you're.
No, that's true. But I am able to focus on venues and people that I know might appreciate it, right? So, and I feel like in some ways it's kind of like my publication. It's kind of niche, you know, like it doesn't have a huge audience. It's got a very small audience. But eventually I will get up the nerve to attend one. I'll probably go to a smaller one like Photonola or Click in North Carolina, who I reviewed with last year. They have a great little festival now.
Well,
it's very unique.
I'll just recommend Medium. Medium's pretty great.
All right, there you go. How many reviewers show up to Medium?
I think it's like 20-ish, something like that.
That's a good number.
Yeah. They keep it fairly. Scott always likes to say Medium is small.
Right.
So I find it really fascinating that, like, you know, for me, especially when I was first starting out, it's sort of less so now, but especially when I was first starting out, I was just so starstruck at the time, like, because I'd been reading Lens Scratch for, you know, maybe a year before I came to my first review, and then I had the chance to sit down with Aline, and like Aline can look at my work, and I'm like, oh my god, like, you know, Aline Smithson is going to look at my work, and and one of the things I thought was really interesting is, you know, so I think a few years later, I was applying to review Santa Fe, and I didn't get in. But then I noticed, like, who are the people that did get in? And it was like that year, I think, Ken Rosenthal, who was one of the speakers at the first Medium and who I've talked with on the show now, and I love his work. And Aline was actually also one of the people that was participating in that as a reviewee. And I thought, like, that is so interesting to me because, you know, I hear these people who, you know, they have these long exhibition histories, and they are already, you know, as much of a household name as one can be in the photo world, you know, and they're also going to these, like, it's like, I think that is really fascinating that, like, you have these people who are, for me, it was this sensation of, you know what, like, we're the same. We're actually the same. And like, you don't outgrow the need for critique and the need for review and the need for opportunities. I just thought that was really kind of for me, that was an important sort of revelation, you know?
Oh, for sure. I had the same experience being a reviewer, because I've sat down with like Aline as a reviewee, and me reviewing her work it's so weird, right? And this has happened several times where I've had some of my favorite photographers sit down and at my table, and I'm like, oh my god, I don't even know how to critique your work because I'm such a fan. You know what I mean? Like, but then have that same realization, like, hey, it doesn't matter, right? But I had the initial, like, you said the word starstruck. I've been starstruck as a reviewer by the photographer sitting down in front of me several times. So I'm like, why are you even sitting with me? You're like, you're way more developed than anything I can tell you, right? But actually, for me, those became conversations not just about their work, but also about how we could work together. And a lot of those people I've befriended and been working with for years now. And I just love those relationships that I've been able to develop because of it. But yeah, I was majorly starstruck, though, especially when I first started doing reviews. Like, why are you sitting on my table? Like, I have nothing to say, but like, I'm just gonna like help your ego, essentially.
I don't think there's nothing wrong with that either. Everybody needs a little bit of that from time to time.
Right.
Well, so there's one last question that I like to ask everybody before we close, and that is whether there is a piece of art or literature or just general creativity that you've experienced recently that meant something to you.
You know, I feel like going back, when I was at Click last year, I got a preview of the 100 Views of the Drowning World by Conan, I can never say his last name, Selznick, that Candela Books had there. I previewed it and saw it in person. I've always been a fan of their work in general. And being a publisher, I was really intrigued by all the different ways they have that big accordion book that I have at home. I've always liked that they think outside the box in photography, but also in how they present their work. Not just the photographs themselves, but the different ways that they do their exhibits and then their publications and stuff like that. So, but this new book, I mean, define book. We're talking about defining what photo is. Well, these guys are good about like define what a book is, because they're really like just cards essentially that make up this book. They're not bound, right? So I find that fascinating. They've looked at working with the publisher, and then I interviewed Gordon about the book and how he got involved with them and the work. So I kind of got an insight into that process. I was less interested in their perspective, but I wanted to see the publisher's perspective, right, on making the book and considering that they're kind of this, they go for these unique book styles, like how that came about. Anyway, so the reason I think that has really stuck with me is because we're talking about photography and kind of the unconventional ways of working in photography. And they've really done that for me, and not just in their work, but also in their, the way they present it with the publishing and stuff like that. Anyways, it's as a publisher and a photographer, it's been very inspiring to follow them in having all these different formats and creative ways to get their work out into the world.
Cool. Yeah. I had heard about that. I remember when they did when Candela did the launch party. It was not that long ago. Yeah. And I had definitely been interested to see that. So hopefully I'll get a chance to see it in person someday. Yeah.
Well, I have a copy, so we'll have to meet up.
Yeah. Well, hey, I really appreciate you taking the time and talking with me. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure.
All right, so as I mentioned at the top of the show, Blue is reviewing at this year's Click Photography Festival. He also has work in the Pacific Northwest Photography Drawers at Blue Sky Gallery in Portland, Oregon. That work will be on display through March of 2019. And that is our show. If you'd like to get in touch, you can find all of the show's contact and social media info in the show notes. If you'd like to support the show, a monthly pledge in any amount to our Patreon campaign is greatly appreciated. You can find that at patreon.com/sakeriver. That's sake like the drink, and river like river. Our theme music is by Poddington Bear. You can find more of his music available for licensing at soundofpicture.com. We'll be back on August 1st with a conversation with writer R.O. Kwan, so be sure to come back for that. And until then, remember, keep the channel open.